It can be a good idea to be minimalistic in a documentary when it comes to how you tell the story. You have to be quite short and to the point, and you could have this minimalistic approach that every shot that you use in the documentary must be relevant for the topic. It must be attractive or cinematic. It has to look good, basically. And of course, it has to be possible to achieve. So when you plan your documentary, you have to be aware that some kind of shots are very difficult to make. I have a small but there, and the small but is that due to digital technology nowadays, it is easier to use visual effects, for example, in a documentary also. And the most obvious example of that is the Walking with Dinosaurs science show. That kind of science show with 3D animated dinosaurs would have been impossible to do 20 years ago. But nowadays, when we have the technology to 3D animate photorealistic animals, then it is possible to do a nature show or a science documentary with, so to speak, live dinosaurs. And even if that kind of computer graphics or 3D modeling 3D animation is of course very time consuming and expensive, you can do simple things yourself. One thing that is important when doing an interview scene is that you have to remember that there's a threesome involved. And what I mean is that if you have the person that are doing the interview and the person that are being interviewed, you have two persons. But there is a third person in the room, and that is the audience. And you have to decide how these people, these persons relate to each other. And for example, one thing that is important is, should the person doing the interview be present or not in the interview? Or is it something that is between the audience and the person that is being interviewed? Because there are interviews where you only see the person that is being interviewed, and then you have the audience and the interviewed. But you can also have the alternative where there is a movie maker in the scene. The person that is doing the interview, you actually see that person on camera. And you have to make up your mind, and you have to be consistent with this. Because if you start out an interview in one mode, so to speak, with just two persons involved, and then all of a sudden it appears a third one, the interviewer, that is confusing for the audience, and the audience kind of wonder, where does this third person come from? It is a little bit sad, but you have to realize that documentaries, it is very difficult in a documentary to talk about the abstract. It is much more easy to talk about things that are concrete and emotional. Film targets the heart and not the mind. And that relates a little bit to the show, don't tell saying. And also it's important to be limited in what you are trying to say and what kind of story you're telling. It can be very tempting to want to include lots of different threads and lots of different events and aspects. But it is important to make a documentary that is as simple-minded as possible, you could say. Or if people want to know more, they can read a paper. that is how you usually think about documentaries, at least. That it has to be as concrete and as simplified as possible. And I'm a little bit ambiguous towards that, because of course it would be nice to have documentaries that are complex and have much depth and so on. And for example, the movie I mentioned before, The 5 Obstructions, I think that one is a good example of a more complex documentary. So I'm not saying that you should keep it simple always, but I'm saying that it is more easy if you keep it simple and concrete. But talking about different kinds of doing a documentary, one attempt to make different documentaries that was very interesting was the documentary manifest. It was written by Lars von Trier, and Lars von Trier is the director who came up with the Dogma 95 manifest, which influenced Danish movie making very much, because he kind of created a creative laboratory where the movie makers could experiment with different ways of doing movies within the rules of the Dogma manifest. And that resulted in a kind of almost rebirth of the Danish movie industry with lots of interesting Dogma movies coming out. So he tried to do this for documentaries also, writing the documentary manifest. It wasn't as successful. Actually, I haven't seen any documentaries. I haven't seen any documentaries made after this manifest. But the rules in the manifest is very interesting, because they kind of turn around how you should or how you could do a documentary, just as the Dogma manifest did with fiction. And if you look at the rules, the intention of the director should be stated. The subject, the persons that the documentary is about, should have 2 minutes of free screen time to say whatever they want about the documentary. Every cut should be marked with a blank frame or black frames, so that it's very obvious if there are cuts in the documentary. The sound or image should not be manipulated at all, and you can't use archive footage. And if you think of a typical documentary and then apply these rules, you realize that you have to tell the story in a completely different way. For example, let's say that you were going to do a documentary about World War II, and you couldn't use archive footage, and you couldn't use image manipulation. How would you do that? Or if you're going to make a science show about dinosaurs, and you can't use image manipulation, how would you do in that way, in that case? Finally, another example of non-mainstream documentary movie making is the journal, the academic journal, Audiovisual Thinking. Myself and 4 other PhD students started this journal a couple of years ago. And the idea is that it is an academic online journal. So researchers publish their research results in this journal, but they do it audiovisually. They aren't allowed to use text. They must tell about their research results in images and with audio. And And that is really going against the idea that you can't make a documentary about abstract and complex subjects. So the question that we put forward was, is it possible to tell about abstract research, for example, with just audiovisual? And I don't know the answer actually. We have had lots of submissions that were quite good, and if you check it out online, you will see that in every issue of the journal there are a few video essays, academic video essays that are trying to speak about research without text. So it works, but the question is if it is good or not. And I suggest that you check it out yourself and see what you think, and let me know. Finally, there is some suggested reading. One issue of the Danish Film Institute journal called Film, number 19, that was one committed to documentaries and very interesting. And an interesting book called Faking It, that was about faked documentaries, mockumentaries.